Hello, beautiful humans. Here we are. Mother and daughter together again. How's it going?
Good. Hi, everybody.
What did you think of your first podcast episode, Emmie?
Um, it was great. I mean, it's a little bit cringe to hear your own voice back recorded, but
Yeah,
everybody
I
was
think
so
we
kind and supportive. So
I think we all feel that way about our voices, but also I often say that my chat is the kindest chat on YouTube.
I think so.
I have good people. I
Me
enjoy them.
too. I love
Thank you,
that.
everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your great comments during the episode, and thank you for joining us here for a little Q&A afterwards. If you had questions that you wanted to ask Emmie, here she is. Thank you, SP Mama. I appreciated interviewing Emmie too. We talk all the time, but it's kind of fun to ask her some questions about how she felt at different times, because I think, like she said in the interview, we sort of had a surface level relationship, and I hadn't been through my healing stuff, and so sometimes it's interesting for me to go back to those times and think, like, how did you feel about that, and
Mm-hmm.
how were you affected by our family dynamics and other things that were going on. And I think mostly it's because, at some point I have to apologize for being unhealed and, not understanding how to be a good mom at the time. But, when you know
You were
better, you do
still a
better.
good mom. I mean, like, you were still a good mom. There were just a lot of things that you didn't know and hadn't addressed. And I feel fortunate as a mom now to be able to know those things about myself and heal and work through them so that I'm able to show up better for my kid, right? But I mean,
Yeah.
when you know better, you do better, and
Yeah.
it's
And I
okay.
think I love seeing you as a mom now, because you're a gentle parent, and you and Bryson are doing such a great job of allowing Ronan to feel what he feels when he feels it, and to validate those feelings. And that's something I think that is rare. So
I mean, I do my best, and everybody in the comments is being so kind. Um, it is a very vulnerable thing to be able to share such a personal and trial or traumatic experience, I guess. But
yeah.
I mean, something that our Queen Brene Brown teaches us is that we can't have connection without vulnerability. And I just
Yeah.
really feel passionately about being honest and sharing my experiences. And that's not for everyone. Some people don't know how to respond to that. But for the most part, I don't have superficial relationships in my life anymore, because the people that show up for me and are that I am close to hear my truth and appreciate it for what it is.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when we're willing to be authentic about our struggles and our experiences, it gives other people permission to also connect on a deep level with their own experiences. And I think that's a rare thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Martha T says, where do you find trusted parenting tools and sources? I used to find them from my church, but those I find dangerous now. Same.
Mm-hmm.
Do
Um,
you have any ideas about that?
yeah, I mean, this is going to show how much of a millennial I am, but there are a lot of really awesome free resources on Instagram. And I found a couple of Instagram creators that I really appreciate their philosophy on parenting. One of them is called Big Little Feelings. And I have a toddler, so they mostly focus on toddlers and development. One of them is like a child development specialist and whatever. But yeah, honestly, the algorithm kind of feeds you things. So as you follow more accounts like that, you'll start to get
Yeah.
more of that stuff fed to you. Another one I really love is called Consent Parenting, and she does a lot of like essay education and prevention education for if you've got young kids that are online. So yeah, I mean, it's all the internet for me. You can, I mean,
Yeah. And
I've read a few parenting books too. Like I go to the library and find stuff sometimes, but it's mostly the internet.
yeah. And when I was a young mom, when you were just a baby, the only things that were really the only resources really available to me at that time were there were a very few books about parenting in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were some mommy blogs, there were some email chains that were going around. I remember belonging to an email chain at the Methodist preschool where you went to school for just a little while, and trying to just glean information from anybody who felt like they were doing it right, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because I felt like I was doing everything wrong. And man, it was so overwhelming to think like, I don't want to parent my kids the way that I was parented, but I don't know how else to do it. And it was, yeah, it was hard trying to find resources to do it in a healthy way, because what I'd been taught growing up is like the church has all the answers, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then when I felt like they didn't, that was really scary for me, you know?
I'm sure.
So,
And honestly, my heart goes out to anybody that had to parent before the internet, because honestly, there's so much information so readily available at your fingertips now. I remember like breastfeeding in the middle of the night, scrolling on my phone and reading about how I could make, certain aspects of being a parent easier. And like you couldn't do that in the 90s and even early 2000s. That's not so much later that we have had this type of access. But the
right.
cool thing is now I think there's really no excuse for being a shitty parent because there are so many resources available. So it makes me laugh sometimes, like parenting is hard no matter the age of your child or what they're going through, but there's just so much out there. Like all you have to do is Google it, so.
Yeah, I do feel that way. Like there's really not an excuse to not be able to figure it out, because if something isn't working, like your first go-to is like, hey, let me go find some resources of people who are
Yeah.
doing it where it is working for them,
Mm-hmm.
because there's so much out there. And yeah, it's
Like
yeah.
you just have to
I
put
do.
in the minimum amount of effort to be able to find free resources that can give you the language to speak to your children differently or handle situations differently. And I mean, it helps if you are a healed person that can do that, right?
Yes.
And it's very
And that
like I recognize my privilege in that as well, because there is a lot of privilege there too.
mhm. Yeah, and okay, I have to put this up here and say this, because when I started realizing that the way I was parenting was not working, I think you were about 7 years old, and I was like, oh man, this is not working. The way that my parents did it was wrong. I didn't want my kids to fear me. I wanted them to love me. And I literally started a blog called God is the Only Perfect Parent.
I remember you
And
saying
I
that.
wanted to and I wanted to get feedback from a wide variety of people. So I didn't want to make it Mormon specific. So I was like, I'm just going to stick to the Bible. So I started looking through the Bible of examples of how God parented his children. And I very quickly got to a place where I was like, this is toxic and horrible. This
Mm-hmm.
God is a horrible parent. This God treats his children with contempt and murders them when they don't do what's right. And I was like,
Right.
I think I wrote 4 or 5 blog posts, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I don't know what God to believe in. Like the God of the Old Testament, the God of the New Testament, they're both terrible. And I remember feeling like really super lost, because I was like, I didn't have good parenting as an example in my house growing up. And if I can't trust God as a parent, like where do I even turn? It was so confusing for me. And that's when I started looking at secular resources and reading mommy blogs and getting involved in other communities, because I was like, some people are doing this right. Some people have good answers. It's not me. I
Mm-hmm.
want to know, wow, it was really eye-opening to me. And that was kind of the beginning of my faith crisis, if we want to be real about it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that was a side note. There are a couple of comments that I want to go over. My grandson will be going on a mission in a couple of years. Reflections of me. Thanks for being here. And it helps me a bit. I'm not LDS. Yeah. So if you've got a family member, loved one going on a mission, I think the main things to focus on are just letting them know that you're a safe space to a person that they can go to if they're having struggles on the mission, especially someone outside the church, because then there's not that stigma of like, you know, are they going to report me to my mission president or whatever?
Right.
Just letting them know that they have a safe resource of somebody they can go to if they're having struggles is really, really important.
Send them a
Holly
lot of mail.
Fabiani, yes, lots of email, lots of real mail too.
Mm-hmm.
Care
Physical mail.
packages, always
There were
welcome.
days when I had the worst day ever, and I would have a letter or a package in my mailbox that I got to check when I came home, and it like made a huge difference for me. So
yeah. Me too. Even now today.
even now today, I love physical mail. Getting mail is awesome.
Yes, Holly, this is my daughter, my oldest daughter, my first waffle, the experiment kid. How old is the little kiddo? Emmie's son is 4.
He's very 4.
Just started preschool and is adorable, and also 4. He's 4.
Mischievous. Today he made a mud pit in the backyard.
Excellent. Wonderful.
As you do
Very
when you're
good.
4.
Right. And probably brought some mud inside.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. As you do.
As you do when you're 4. Yeah.
Burning question. How do we feel? Emmie, how do you feel after the episode?
Great.
Good.
I mean,
no,
it feels a little bit cathartic to be able to share my story, and it's so kind and so weird to me that people would even care to hear it, but it's been nice to just be able to talk about that in such a real way without having to sugarcoat it or say, you know, well, I got to meet my husband there, and you know, I met some of my best friends. Those things are true, and there are some aspects of the mission that I appreciate and am thankful for, but for the most part, it feels nice to just be able to be honest about it.
Yeah, that's good. And I guarantee you that there are a lot of people who did not comment or who have not even seen the episode yet who benefit by your story. And you probably will never know that the wide reach that this has. There are so many people who will watch this later and really benefit from what you're sharing. And I'm just grateful for you being willing to be vulnerable and put your story out there. So
thanks for putting it out there.
To my tiny little corner of the internet. So MB says, we didn't do feelings in my house growing up. Same. So letting my kids feel has been incredibly important to me as one of my, I'm going to do this different. And can you talk about that? Because in my house growing up, feelings were not allowed. We had to make ourselves small. We got sent to our room if we were crying. I tried to do better with you guys, but I know it wasn't much better because I still, especially when you were young, I had not dealt with a lot of my own feelings. So can you kind of address this a little bit?
Yeah, so I felt a little bit of the same way growing up, mostly because, and this is what I've learned now as a parent too, having a child that's screaming is super overstimulating, right? And I think having as many kids as we did in such a small space, because our house was small, and you and dad both dealing with your own mental health stuff, it was overstimulating 100% of the time in our house.
Yeah.
And honestly, I can't blame dad for just saying, like, if we were screaming or crying or fighting or whatever, he'd just say, go to your room. Just go to your room.
Yeah.
Come out when you're calm. And that was kind of like the thing that you did as a parent, you know, like, and what you don't realize is the message that sends to your kids is, my feelings are not acceptable and my feelings are too big for you. I can't trust you with my feelings, right? So like, yeah, I did feel a lot of that growing up. But now as a parent, it's been super helpful, and I will be 100% honest about this. I don't feel like I was a very good parent until very recently, because I am now on an antidepressant that really works for me. I have an ADHD diagnosis, so I know that about myself, that I do get overstimulated easily, you know, on all those things. So it's hard. Like, you know, being a parent is hard no matter how old your kid is. And sometimes things happen that you just can't control. Like a 4-year-old being 4, he's going to have really big feelings. He's going to be loud a lot of the time. He's going to make huge messes I'm going to have to clean up. And it's not easy, but getting the mental health help that I have gotten has made such a huge difference for me, especially being on my antidepressant, because I feel like now I can regulate my emotions a lot better. And that's the thing that I think parents don't realize, is that when you can't regulate your own emotions in a healthy way, you can't help a child work through their feelings in a healthy way either.
Yeah.
So that's made the biggest difference for me.
Yeah, that's so true. I hear this all the time from not only from healthy parents, but also from professionals. If you want your kids to be emotionally healthy, fix yourself first. And
Yeah,
that's
because you're
why
the example.
and that's why I focus so much on that on my channel, about healing yourself and working on yourself. And a lot of people are like, oh, you're so selfish, just thinking only about you. I'm like, no, you cannot help anyone else heal until
Mm-hmm.
you have healed yourself. And I saw that in myself as a parent too. I could not show up authentically for my kids and be the kind of parent that they needed until I got to the point where I healed my own wounds and started working on my own emotional health. And then once I did, I realized how deficient I was as a parent. And I realized how much my kids suffered through emotional deprivation, basically, because
Mm-hmm.
not being able to reckon with my own emotions anytime they had a similar emotion, I didn't know how to deal with it or how to handle it. And
Mm-hmm.
so it wasn't until much later, when I worked on my own stuff, that I was able to come back and say, wow, I really didn't handle that well. Let me show up for you now. you know um and then you guys all had your own stuff to work through, because of that. So
Mm-hmm.
I just think that our best bet as parents to have healthy children is to heal our own wounds first. And
Oh,
and having to do that while you're a parent is incredibly overwhelming and difficult and horrible, but it is the best chance that your kids have of having a healthy future.
I think so too. And honestly, being a parent has been so healing and cathartic for me in a lot of ways, because I have been able to show up for my kid in a way that my parents didn't show up for me. And I've been able to kind of like rewire my brain and, take a different path. And I know that you and dad were just doing the best that you could with the information you had at the time and the circumstances that we were in, which were not great. And
Yeah.
so I don't harbor any resentment or, I'm not upset about that. It's been so awesome for me to be a mom, and I love being a mom for a lot of reasons. I have an amazing kid, but mostly it's just been so cool to do things differently than what I experienced and give my child
Yeah.
things that I didn't get to have.
Yeah. I love that.
Me too.
Dippity doo, thank you for this resource. Dr. Shafali is fabulous. She totally shifted my perspective on parenting when my oldest was little. She has a few books, The Awakened Family, The Conscious Parent. I've heard of these, and I've heard that she's a
Mm-hmm.
great resource. I appreciate that. And then SP Mama, yes, Dr. Amen in Canada for brain health, ADHD, other things. He scans brains and he talks about neurofeedback. I think he's got a fabulous podcast. His channel has wonderful resources. The one thing that I will say that I find problematic is that his brain scanning services are so prohibitively expensive, doesn't take insurance. So like, unless you have an extra $3,000 to burn and you can afford to travel to one of those clinics to get your brain scanned, it's not going to, benefit you personally. But he does have a lot of good things to say. So he has a lot of advice out there. I just wish that his services were a little more accessible. So that's all I have to say about that. I like Dr. Amen a lot. I like what he has to say. Lamisa, thanks for saying, I think these kinds of healthy, loving, high functioning, accepting parental adult child relationships are a mega threat to the church. Megan, I hope you're both proud of being cycle breakers.
That's actually true. And it's so interesting because the general authorities recently, I can't remember where it was in like a conference address or something, but they said that when these young moms like my age leave the church, the whole family leaves with them. And I mean, that's been my experience, you know, and the experience of a lot of good friends of mine as well, because I think, I mean, there are a lot of reasons, but especially as women, there's not a place for you in the church. I mean, it's so patriarchal that even if you are in like a position of leadership, you still report to a man. You still have to get permission from a man to do things. Like, for a long time, I tried to stay in the church to be like a positive change and to try and change things from within. I think every ex-Mormon kind of goes through that phase. And you just can't do it as a woman. You just can't.
You can't affect change when you don't have the ultimate say over making change in your own organization. I've said this so many times, I'll continue to say it. The highest ranking woman in the LDS church still has to answer to a man.
Mm-hmm.
The president of the General Relief Society president, like the one who sits on the stand during General Conference, she's still outranked by her 12-year-old grandson who just became a deacon.
Mm-hmm.
And when she wants to make changes in her organization, she still has to submit them to a man. So as a woman, it's really, really hard to be within the church trying to affect change. And for me, it eventually felt like spitting in the wind, you know, like I can speak up in my little church congregation, but let's be honest. So after the pandemic, I had stopped going to church during the pandemic. And afterwards, I got called and asked if I would be a Relief Society teacher again. I had done that calling before. And I started to think about how I would handle that and what I would say and all the things I had learned during my time sort of stepping away from the church. And I started to play that forward and think, okay, what's going to happen? Well, I'm going to refuse to teach XYZ lesson because I think it's harmful. I'm going to speak up about the things that this general authority said because I think it's harmful to women's mental health. I'm going to speak up about the gospel topics essays being published, women being marginalized. I'm going to start saying all of these things. And eventually my bishop is going to get mad at me. My stake president's going to get mad at me. I'm going to get excommunicated. And I'm just going to become another statistic where members are going to look at me and they're going to say, oh, well, she was disagreeing. She was advocating for change and she got what she deserved, you know, and I just didn't want to be that.
Mm-hmm.
And so playing it forward, I just thought, like, it doesn't make any sense for me to waste my effort trying to create change within the church when I know that it's not going to be effective. And arguably, maybe I could have at least caused some people to start questioning things, but that's really not what I want to do anyway. I don't ever want to rip anyone's faith away from them. My faith crisis was the hardest thing that I've ever been through, and that's a lot considering what I've been through. And so I don't want anyone to leave the church who doesn't want to leave the church. I don't want to destroy anyone's faith. I do want to tell the truth. I do want people to be informed about what they're getting into and what they're buying into and what they're donating their time and talents and money towards. But it's just complicated. I don't want to hurt people. I just want people to know what's real. Anyway, we've gotten off on a tangent.
That's okay.
And by we, I mean me.
Yeah, but it's true. Like, nothing that you said is untrue.
Yeah. I just try to be what is objectively true. It is objectively true that women don't have as much of a voice in the church as men do. And that's the end of it. PPS, Positive Parenting Solutions. Can't remember if it's Christian. I just remembered her teachings gave me real tools. So thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate it. There are some things I'm going to get to in a minute. It's hard to get to everything. So much compassion for my mom parenting in the 80s and 90s and all her issues. She had no support. And I agree with this. Like, I feel the same way about my parents too. Thank you for saying this. This is really kind of you. Lamisa, this is true. Public libraries are a great resource for parenting information.
So true.
I appreciate that. Let's see. I'm wondering if you mean how many first-time moms are here or first waffles. My mom was so challenged by my different parenting than she did, triggered almost because she didn't know a lot of it was abusive. Yeah, and that was it's so hard because when I started to say, it was really hard for me to even say the words out loud, my childhood was abusive.
Mm-hmm.
And talking with my parents about it, my mom's her very first response was, I never intended to be abusive. And of course we don't
Yeah.
intend to be abusive. Like none of us, at least, okay, 99% of us don't go into it saying, I'm going to harm my child. But we don't realize that what we're doing is harmful. And so then we try to find another way. It's the
Mm-hmm.
parents who don't really try to find another way that do sort of bother me. You know, if there's anything I could say, like if what you're doing is not working, if you're not happy, if your kids aren't happy, if it seems like they're struggling, if you're struggling, reach out for help, because there are so many resources
Mm-hmm.
for so many things.
And I do think a lot of parents of the older generation, like your parents, my husband's parents, sometimes when they see you doing your parenting stuff in a different way, it feels threatening to them
Yeah,
because they feel like it's almost like a personal attack on their character, their parenting, right? It's this ego that gets going in their minds that it's hard. It's hard for parents, especially of that generation, to see people doing it a different way. And instead of
yeah,
just being happy for them, happy for their grandkids, they're like, "Why are you saying that I was a crappy parent?" And it's like, "Well, yes, I am, but also this is what's best for my family and my kid." And
yeah,
it's a hard dynamic sometimes.
yeah. It is super hard. All right, so I'm going through some more of these comments. I want to get to some questions. Thank you, Emmie, for spending so much time with us tonight. I know that, and thank Bryson for us, because he's on
Yeah,
dad duty
Bryson's the
then.
real hero because he's doing bedtime by himself.
Oh yeah, I know what bedtime is like over there. Um, how was Ronan feeling tonight? Was he doing
He
okay,
was
or
very cuddly and very sweet, and I think he's reading stories right now with
ah,
Daddy, so
good?
it's all
Yeah.
good.
This is a great question. Do you think men suffer from patriarchal systems? Do I absolutely do,
100%.
because there is so much expectation heaped upon men in patriarchal systems. And I'm actually going to repost my interview with Tommy Johnson. I interviewed him about the sort of oppression that he felt in the church as a man expected to do certain things. And I'm going to repost that interview. During September is Suicide Prevention Month. And I want people to understand it's not just women who suffer in a patriarchy, men do too, because there's so much of an expectation for them to behave a certain way, for them to achieve certain milestones, reach certain markers. I think everybody suffers in that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, really difficult.
That was one of the big reasons that Bryson and I decided to step away from church because, I mean, we have a little boy who was 3 years old going to his nursery class and already being talked about. They were having these little lessons about receiving the priesthood, preparing to serve a mission. Like the indoctrination starts so early and it is so much pressure for men. It's just really harmful.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, so now I'm going to get to a couple of questions that are somewhat off topic, off of the mission topic, and then we're going to bring it around back around to the mission topic. So a couple people have asked a similar question. That's why I'm going to put this one up here. How do you feel about your mother's involvement in the Lori Cox case?
I mean, here's the thing. When you are related to somebody like Lori, I think it brings up a lot of really complicated feelings about your family of origin and the culture that you grew up in. And I think my mom has just needed to speak about this, and part of her healing has been being so public about it. And I don't care. Really, like, I mean, I know that a lot of other members of our family have had their feelings about my mom's involvement, but I what I want for my mom is to be able to process and heal her feelings in the way that feels most authentic to her. And I think that doing this podcast and, covering some of the Lori stuff has been a big part of that for her. Everybody processes their grief and trauma in different ways. So this is just her way. Do you feel like that's accurate?
Yeah, I do. I'm curious, and you can tell me you don't want to talk about this right now, but if you feel comfortable, was there a time when I started talking about this stuff that was uncomfortable for you, that you didn't like it, or that you had stuff you had to go through, or?
No,
I mean, these are personal questions.
No, I think it was difficult for me to understand at first, just because I didn't feel the need to speak about it publicly. Like that's not how I processed those feelings. But I also recognized that you and Lori were really close, way closer than I was to her, and so I think I felt like maybe it was a little bit weird at first, just because of the different news sources that were wanted. Like I remember you going on Fox News, and I was like, "Why is she going on Fox News?" But that was mostly just because it was Fox News, not because it was you. So,
well, to be fair, just to clarify for everybody in the world, Justin Lum is like the first reporter on this case. He works for Fox 10 Phoenix, and he is the person who broke the story in Arizona when Charles was killed. Basically, he's covered it from the very beginning, and he was the vocal authority on this case. So that's the reason he's the first person that I reached out to, because he was the most vocal about covering the case and calling attention to it, because he believed before anyone else did that this was gonna end badly,
Right.
So,
well, and I do think too that so much of this Lori stuff is wrapped up in Mormonism. It's a very Mormon adjacent story. And I think that what you talked about on your episode with John DeLynn on Mormon stories is really important to say out loud, that where the Mormon church is at culturally is not that far off from these cult groups that have these crazy beliefs, and I think that that's important to say. And you were the only one saying it.
Yeah, and that's the whole reason I started talking about it, is because everybody kept saying like what a great mom Lori was, and how she was the cupcake mom and the word chorister, and that was something that I didn't experience for me personally. Like I saw her toxic behavior as a young adult, and I felt really angry that people were missing this aspect of her. Not only angry, but also scared that somebody could, be her best friend, or be her sister, or be her brother, spend so much time with her and not see that there were toxic dynamics there. And I think part of it too is just the whole family outlet of like covering things up and letting people get away with things, not holding people accountable, and then terrible things happen. And so that was why.
That was very a parallel of the culture of our family as well. And I think you needed to process that alongside this Mormon stuff too.
Yeah, it was also a big part of it was me processing, like, these are the people that share my DNA, and there, but for the grace of God go I. Like, how is it that, like, Lord, and I don't think I've talked a lot about this publicly. I'll say this for the first time right here. Lori's life and my life are so similar. We had parallel stories. Like, we went through some of the exact same experiences, and it scared me to see where she ended up. And I wanted to dig in and figure out, like, why didn't that happen to me? Why didn't I go down that same path? Why am I not locked up in some institution somewhere? And, I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to say, like, these are the things that contributed to her unhealth. And so anyway, it's a tangent, but I think it's a blessing and a curse that, like, every time I have a live or an episode, it's going to come around to this case. It's a curse because I hate talking about it. It's a blessing because it needs to be talked about.
And I think you're very brave for talking about it in such a public way, especially with all the backlash that you've received from our extended family too. It's not easy to be the person that calls all of this stuff out.
Yeah, it's hard, and I often it feels lonely, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, look at that.
That's very kind. And honestly, if my kid learns nothing else from me, it's to be a critical thinker.
Oh yeah, 100%. Okay, so I'm going to do one more question about the case, and then we're going to be done, and we're going to go back to mission stuff.
Okay.
But this is actually Sarah Bishkin. You know, when I first put this up here, I was like, "How do you feel doing the episode?" Well, this was the follow-up. How do you feel about Chad Daybell getting the death penalty? Because I'm personally blank. I can't make up my own mind on how I feel. I did an episode right after the sentencing, talking about how I really felt, especially as a true believing Mormon, I believed in the death penalty. I thought it was the best thing, a life for a life. If you take someone's life, you don't deserve to have any more life. And after he was sentenced to death, I really just felt emptiness. I felt sadness. I felt grief. And I came to the conclusion that I can't find a difference between justice and revenge. And for me, it felt really terrible, and I hate it. And I'm of a mixed mind about it, because while I feel like giving someone the death penalty means giving up on their ability to heal ever, and it means giving up on the ability that any of us can heal, at the same time, I look at Lori, who's sentenced to life, but she gets her iPad and she gets to text with people. And I got messages from people a couple weeks ago from people who are still texting with her, and she's preaching her visions of glory crap, and she's still gaining followers. And I'm like, okay, well, Chad's on death row though, so he doesn't get to talk to people, you know? Mm-hmm. So there's so many mixed feelings that I have about it. And I'm curious if you have anything that you want to say about it, because you and I haven't talked about it.
My feeling is that death is the easy way out. Death is the way that you would not have to live with the consequences of your actions. And I don't think our prison system is particularly, I don't think very highly of it. But I think there is something to be said for somebody having to spend their life in prison, isolated, thinking about the consequence of their actions, you know?
Yeah.
I think Jeffrey Epstein's death was a tragedy purely because he will not have to suffer any of the consequences of his actions. And I don't necessarily know how I feel about Chad being sentenced to the death penalty. And if Lori is in prison but still, you know, able to do all of those things, she's not really facing those consequences either, you know? So I don't know. It's not a good system. It's not a perfect system.
Yeah, I mean, it's problematic, of course. You know, it costs a lot less money to have someone serve life in prison than the death penalty. We get all these paroles, we get all these appeals, sorry, not paroles, but appeals, where the living victims get re-traumatized because they have to keep hanging on to it. They have to keep, you know, getting alerts every time there's another hearing and things like that. You know, it's problematic on so many levels, and I don't think that there's a good answer to it. All I can say right now is that I just continue to have very mixed feelings about it, and I wish it would just go away. I said after Lori's trial was over that my greatest wish was that her next trial there would be no cameras, no news reporters, no bloggers, no YouTubers, nobody covering her stuff, because she loves it.
Yeah.
She feeds off of it, and she gets her narcissistic supply out of people paying attention to her and her case. But it's never going to happen. And here's the reason why, I think, is because the reason people love true crime so much is because we have these existential fears, and probably our biggest existential fear is a fear of death. And if we can understand how not to get unalived, then we feel better about ourselves. And so we watch these true crime cases and we go, okay, that's what happened in that case. I'm going to make sure that I never join a cult. that's what happened in this other case. I'm going to make sure that I never go on a date alone with a guy I don't know without telling someone where like that kind of stuff. I think that's why true crime is so interesting to people. And I understand it. I understand the fascination with it. I understand the need to mitigate our existential fears. I just hope that this is what I always say, by having these conversations, by calling attention to the manipulative behaviors, that at some point we are going to recognize these things and head off some more tragedies. And I don't know if what I'm doing is completely futile. I hope it's not. But
I don't think it is.
I keep doing it.
I'm going to go grab my water. I'll be right back.
Go grab your water. We want to see your Rebel sticker again. We all love your Rebel sticker.
Okay.
So I want to come back to this question. I don't know if Emmy's comfortable addressing this right now on a live in front of everybody. I can just tell you, for me, yes, there it is. We love it. It's wonderful. I want one of those so bad.
I'll get you one for Christmas.
Oh, thank you. Where I am with, and Disney on the other side. What a paradox.
I like what I like.
To be a rebel on one side and to also buy into Disney on the other side, I think is like ultimate contradiction.
I love Disney, and I don't love capitalism, but I love Disney. So that's something I wrestle with every day.
I get it. We're complicated people.
We are, what?
True. As far as my faith, all I can tell you is that I have no idea. I don't know. And I am allergic to anybody who tells me that they know, because I don't think you can know, quote unquote, know, like absolutely 100%. And I think that's why Mormonism is so attractive to so many people, is because it answers all the questions. And I mean, at least all the big questions. Then we have little questions and they're like, don't worry about that. God will take care of it. But I think it answers a lot of the big existential questions. And so I think that's why a lot of people are attracted to it. But for me, I don't know. I don't think anyone can know. And I think all we can do is hope. And I actually love this space of I don't know, because it allows me to consider a myriad of different opportunities and options and explanations.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think there's something to be said for being brave enough to exist in a place where you don't know everything. And that's something that I've had to unlearn, from the church, is that you're sort of expected to have everything figured out. And, to know. People go up and bear their testimony and they say, I know that Joseph Smith was a prophet and I know that the church is true. And it's like, do you really know? Because I feel like most people don't.
Yeah. I feel like most people don't, and they're afraid to say that they don't, and they're afraid to admit to themselves that they don't. Mm-hmm. Because that means saying, like, I really don't know what happens after this life. And I remember one of the first times that I sort of confronted this idea of agnosticism was actually in the movie Sleepless in Seattle, which is so silly. Like our whole lives are movies. Like, movies are the thing. When
Joe Fusco Jr.
Oh, that was
While you were sleeping. That's a different sleeping movie, right?
Different sleeping movie.
Sorry.
But when the mom dies and the little boy asks him, what happens when we die, and the dad says, I don't know. And I was like, what a brave thing for a father to say to a son, that they don't know, rather than trying to give him some fairy tale story that's going to make him feel better. Like, there's nothing that can make you feel better about that. Mm-hmm. And so I was so grateful for someone saying, I don't know. Like, I would much rather hear that than some bedtime story that doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. It just makes me cry, because like, I wish somebody had told me the truth, Anyway, I love the space of I don't know. I think I agree with this. I think it's one of the safest places. because all we can say is that I hope this, but I don't know for sure. And I think that it's healthy to question. I think that it's healthy to not have an answer for everything. So,
you know what is so interesting is that when I was on my mission, I was in a district where my district leader asked me to teach on this concept of belief versus knowledge. And because it was something that I had talked to them about, and it's so funny because when you're a missionary, they tell you during your personal study, you need to be studying for the people that you're going to teach that day. And I never did that. I was like, I'm going to study what I feel like I need to hear, what I want to study about, like things that I'm interested in. I made a whole timeline of like things that happened in the Bible and things that happened in the Book of Mormon. And I like made it chronologically by year to see like how those things lined up. Like I was very studious and very interested in making sense of all of this, even as a missionary. But I gave a whole class to these other missionaries about the difference between knowing something and just believing it. And how that was a really important distinction for missionaries to make, because you're not always going to know everything.
Yeah, that's so true. Okay, so we probably have time just for a couple more questions. I just want to say thank you guys for being here. Please take the time to like the video if you can. The best way to support the channel for free is to subscribe to the channel, hit your notifications so that you always know when we're going live. I try to do Wednesday evening episode followed by live Q&A. I try to do Sunday evening intentions for the week and just like open conversation, support for each other. This channel is one of the kindest places that I've ever seen on YouTube. People are very supportive. And we have very rarely had to kick people out for bad comments. So it's just one of the places where you can feel free to share how you feel, and people are going to be super supportive. So thank you for being here. Please like, please subscribe. If you're able to join as a member, I do have members only content. Most of it is a little bit more personal than this, although I don't know how it could be because we are pretty personal here, sharing these, these real things. But it's the best way to support the channel and make sure that these videos get out there in the YouTube algorithm. Over 50% of the people who watch my channel are not subscribers, and it's totally free to do it. It just takes one click, and it helps the videos get out there to more people who need them. And if you think someone needs to hear this content, please share it with them. You can always email me at megan@third-verse.com. I get a ton of user feedback. I love to try and answer every question that comes my way. It's getting harder and harder to do that because I get more and more. But I always do encourage you, please, to email me if you have something that you want to talk about, a question, a comment, or whatever. Comments on the videos are great. That helps the algorithm too. I try to answer all the comments, or at least like them and interact with them. So I want to thank you, Emmie, again, for giving so much of your time. Please give Bryson a huge hug for me. Of course, give Ronan a big kiss. Coming back to what we actually started the episode talking about, why are Mormon missions so different from other missions like service missions? Can you address this? Do you want me to?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, so growing up in South Texas, there's a lot of Christian religions and a lot of religions that send people on mission trips, specifically teenagers and young adults. Most of that stuff is like humanitarian work, service-oriented kind of stuff. And Mormon missions are primarily proselyting missions. You're going there to share the gospel of Jesus Christ and the message of the Mormon church. And if you do some humanitarian work or some service, mixed in, which I did and missionaries do often, that's great, but that's not the primary focus. So I would say that's the biggest difference. And also, Mormon missionaries, the financial aspect is much different than these service-oriented Christian missions, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that as I think about, especially a lot of my students who were, Christian, evangelical kind of people, a lot of them went on service missions. A lot of them spent their spring breaks going on service missions and things like that. And sometimes they would pay their own way to go on these things, and they would go to places like Africa, and they would go specifically with the intent of trying to help people get access to clean water and things like that. I think the difference is that there is a level of indoctrination in the MTC that you go through. You are required, at least in a lot of missions, I know this is not universally true, but a lot of foreign missions, you're required to surrender your passport. So you can't just go home if you want to. You have to go to the mission president and ask him if you want to go home. And you're kind of socially expected to stay for the entire time. And when you don't, there's a lot of stigma behind it. So I think in a lot of evangelical groups, when kids or even young adults go on mission trips, it's a very short amount of time. You're not isolated away from your family. You can contact people if you want to. In the Mormon mission, you are very isolated. I know now they have a lot more contact with their parents and their family than they used to. But historically, it's been a very isolationist culture. And you're expected to teach the gospel 24/7. You're expected to seek the guidance of the Holy Spirit 24/7. There's no break from it. There's no getting away from it. So it just feels like it's much more of a, I don't know, you're kind of secreted away from the world, whereas evangelical missions feel like it's a shorter amount of time and there's a way to get out if you need to.
Well, and I think one of the biggest things about Mormon missions is that it pretty much guarantees that there's always going to be another generation of devout Mormons that are going to get married in the temple and have children that are Mormons. And so it's kind of a way to feed into this culture. And, it's a huge like rite of passage as a Mormon to go on your mission and sort of like grow up and like learn all these really hard lessons and do all these really hard things. And it's treated very much as like a springboard for the rest of your life. If you go on this mission and you live all these rules and study the scriptures every day and all that stuff, those habits are supposed to then lead into the rest of your life. So I think it's also very much a way to guarantee that members stay active and that their children stay active.
Yeah, it's kind of further indoctrination. And I know a lot of people comment that that they will only marry a returned missionary. And even for men now, a lot of men will say like they won't date anybody who hasn't been on a mission because the opportunities are the same time and stage for men as for women. So one last quick thing, and it's not a quick thing, but I'm going to answer it quickly. Do you both know of any obvious misconceptions about Mormonism? Yes.
Yeah, I would say there's a lot.
There's a lot. I've dug a lot into it. I've done a lot of research. I didn't allow myself to really do any research about it until recently. I will say recently, meaning like 2023, the beginning of 2023. And once I did allow myself to look at resources that were not officially approved by the church, I very quickly found that the church is hiding a lot of the true information. And I think that is really harmful. I think there was a general authority that said, if we have the truth, it will stand up to scrutiny and harm. And if we don't have the truth, it ought to be harmed. And I agree with that 100%. And the problem is that it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. When you scrutinize it, you realize very quickly how much has been hidden. And it's very destabilizing. And, I went into a difficult, dark spiral when I started learning those things, knowing how much I had been lied to and feeling betrayed. And betrayal trauma is a real thing. So for me, that was really hard. What about you, Em? Do you want to talk about any of that?
I mean, I think I would say that, like, I came in contact with a lot of people on my mission that thought they knew what Mormons were about, and just like some superficial things, like Mormons aren't Christians, which is not true. Mormons are Christians. It's called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I mean, that Mormons are polygamists, not technically and not currently, but there is a history of polygamy that most Mormons don't feel comfortable talking about. So yeah, there's all kinds of stuff that people believe or they see in pop culture. They watch the Book of Mormon musical or whatever, and they, I think honestly part of the way that the church sort of gets you is that like you're not gonna know a Mormon and really know what we're about until you talk to them. And then once you talk to them, they are going to share their message with you. And it's like, yeah.
It's all been difficult. And I'm grateful that we are where we are now. We don't know everything, but we know more than we did. And I think that's all we can expect from ourselves as human beings, to learn and to learn better and to know better. Yeah.
Agree.
Well, I love you so much.
I love you too.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for giving us so much time. And thanks for being honest and vulnerable and authentic with us. I think people appreciate you. Yes, we could both use hugs. That would be great. Thank you.
That's okay. Honestly,
yes. I was just going to say, on a future podcast, I will explain betrayal trauma. It's a real thing. It's something I think probably more people have been through than realize that they've been through it. I think a lot of people don't realize that they've been through it. What were you going to say?
I think we should do another episode about like mental health. I mean, I know you already talked to Tommy about like men's mental health and patriarchy and all the stuff within the church. But I think it would be really interesting to explore that a little bit more with you, because I've learned so much from you about mental health and
mental health, where it intersects with the mission or with religion or just in general for moms.
I think
or
where
what?
it intersects with the mission and religion, I think would be really interesting to explore. But also as a young mom, it's something that I'm pretty passionate about as far as moms getting the mental health support that they need too. But we can talk about that later.
Yeah, I've definitely had channel members ask for something around the idea of moms needing mental health work and, what it's like to raise kids and work on your own mental health at the same time. So yeah, we'll do something along those lines. Yeah.
I think also addressing some of the temple stuff too would be really interesting, because we didn't get into that at all in our episode.
Yeah, we didn't. And I know that I've got it on my list of things I need to do an episode about. I want to address it in a respectful way, but at the same time, so many things need to be said. So I think it would be interesting for us to do that episode together, since I was there when you went through for the first time. And it is such a generational thing. My mom was there when I went through for the first time.
She was there when I was there. Yeah, it was like 3 generations in the temple together. It's like a big deal.
Woo. So yeah, these things are coming, you guys. We'll be on it. So thanks for being here tonight. There's more Emmie to come.
If anybody cares to hear me talk more, I guess. But I just like talking with you, selfishly.
I know, it's kind of fun. This isn't, to be honest with you guys on the channel watching, this is not a whole lot different than how we talk when there's not an audience watching. I know there's only there's fewer than 50 people here right now, but from historical stuff, at least a few hundred people will see this video at some point. So I just want you to know, like, this is how we really are. And the reason I think it's important to say that is just because we're not hiding anything, and we're not trying to be different. We're not trying to put on some kind of persona for the internet. It's like this. These are real things that need to be talked about, and it's how we really feel about it. So yeah. Thanks, everyone.
I think the only difference is that maybe we have stayed more on topic than we usually do.
That's so true. 100%. I have tried really hard to stay on topic and not get distracted with movie quotes and the other things that we talk about. Animal noises, impressions,
Yes.
accents.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's late. I love you. I hope you have a great night. And thanks everyone for being here to witness our mother-daughter chat.
Love you too. Have a good
Take care.
evening. Thanks, everybody.